Welcome back to Tongue of the Serpent. In our last episode, old bargains continued to show their teeth. Sabine Devereux remained caught between death and return, tethered by something no prayer, charm, or good intention had yet been able to loosen. Mercy and Cassian followed the paper trail left behind by the Sisters of the Purple Veil, searching for the women who may have known what happened to Lenore. And Renaud Blackwood, called home by Raven's warning that Doe was fading, took to the road with a letter in his coat pocket and far too many ghosts riding beside him. But roads are not always roads in this world. Some repeat themselves, some open sideways, some remember the terms of bargains better than the people who made them. Tonight, Lucien Devereux must face the question of Sabine's body. Mercy begins to understand what rose from the ashes of the Order, and Renaud discovers that being claimed by a power is never as simple as surviving it. This is episode 23, Flesh and Thread. Renaud on the road. Renaud Blackwood had been driving for hours, though the miles had developed the slippery ethics of a dream. The highway stretched ahead in long black ribbons, shining faintly where the damp held on. His headlights skimmed over shoulder grass, warped reflectors, and the occasional sign surrendering itself to vines. The radio muttered softly to itself. He had left it on for company, though it had long since stopped qualifying. Raven's letter rested in the pocket of his coat on the passenger seat. He did not need to unfold it again. He knew every line by heart. He knew the pressure of the paper, the tilt of her hand, the way bad news always seemed to arrive looking more composed than the person reading it. Doe is fading. It was a dreadful sentence, compact, efficient, cruel in the tidy way of things that ruin your night and then have the nerve to fit on a single line. Renaud kept both hands on the wheel. Going home had never been simple. It carried obligations. It carried old roles that climbed onto your shoulders the moment you got close enough. It carried the sour knowledge that places remembered versions of you that you had worked very hard to outlive. New Orleans was behind him now, and the road was drawing him toward canvas, smoke, lights, and family. He felt the pull of it in his ribs, less like a decision, more like being reeled in by something patient. A billboard stood off to the right, half crooked in the dark. "Jesus saves," it declared in paint that had seen better centuries. Renaud passed it with all the enthusiasm he usually reserved for moral advice from plywood. A minute later, he saw it again. Same billboard, same listing support posts, same spray of vine at the lower corner, the sort of repetition that would have been comforting in wallpaper and deeply unwelcome in geography. He frowned. Then came the tree, standing near the edge of the roadway, tall, bent, bare, white with moonlight, one dead thing standing alone with the confidence of an old witness. He passed that too. The radio crackled, and from somewhere inside the static, a woman's voice rose, for a single line of him. Her voice sounded honey rough, ancient, familiar in the way some sounds are familiar to the spine before the mind catches up. Silence followed, but 3 bends later, there was the tree again. Renard swore, reached for the dial, and rewarded the radio with a vicious twist. Static roared. The same voice returned with the same line of song. He drove another quarter mile on stubbornness alone, then pulled over onto the shoulder and cut the engine. The car ticked softly as it cooled. His headlights shone out across black water and reeds. He waited. The night, having given him sufficient time to understand that this was now personal, began to rearrange itself. The shoulder softened. The asphalt gave way to packed earth. Marsh water widened on either side, gleaming like polished ink. Candles appeared in the dark ahead, hanging at different heights as though the road had grown its own constellation. Where the highway should have gone on, there stood a crossing. It had the appearance of something older than roads. It looked like a place where decisions carried legal force. Renard stepped out, one hand already flexing toward the kind of magic he preferred to keep in reserve.
This,
he said, to no one visible,
feels wildly unnecessary.
The candles stirred. A presence moved through the marsh. It came with the calm authority of weather crossing water. The flames bent toward it. The reeds gave a small whisper. The road itself seemed to know better than he did what had arrived. A woman stood at the crossing. The candle flames bent toward her before Renard had time to understand what he was seeing. She wore black the way night wore black, not as ornament, but as fact. Her garments falling in long, severe folds that seemed stitched from shadow, smoke, and the memory of old rites. Her hair lay dark about her, threaded here and there with dull silver that caught the candlelight like moonlight on a blade. Nothing about her was hurried. Nothing about her asked to be admired. She stood with the grave composure of something older than worship and far less dependent on it. In her face there was beauty, if one insisted on using the word, but it had the austere, punishing quality of a statue that had watched empires kneel and found the gesture unsurprising. Renard reached first for sarcasm because old habits die hard and occasionally survived out of pure spite. He reached next for magic. After that, he went searching for certainty and found the cupboard bare. The woman regarded him with stillness, old enough to make human panic feel embarrassingly recent. Then the road beneath his feet gave one slow, subtle shudder, and 3 shadows stretched behind her where only one body stood. Renard's mouth went dry. This was not a ghost or a witch. This was not one of Lucifer's bright infernal courtiers dressed up for intimidation. This was a goddess of thresholds, a keeper of keys. The old dark place where roads chose what they meant. Hecate. The name clicked into place. You have been traveling on broken terms for longer than you know, she said. The road shivered. The candles drew outward. The dark leaned sideways. The marsh, the car, the shoulder, the whole careful geometry of the ordinary world folded in on itself like scenery being cleared between acts. Renard had just enough time to understand one thing. This was a summons. Then the road opened around him, and he vanished sideways out of the living world. Sabine's body. By morning, the courtyard had given up any attempt at serenity. The fountain still ran. Jasmine still climbed the walls in soft green loops. Sunlight stretched itself across the cracked flagstones with every appearance of goodwill. The house, however, had been listening all night, and everyone standing in the courtyard knew it. Lucien Devereux stood near the fountain with one hand resting lightly on the stone rim, as though it was the only object present with a reliable sense of its own purpose. Evelyn leaned against one of the columns, composed in the stern and glittering way she did when composure had become a weapon. Madame Claudette stood with her arms folded, expression sharpened to a practical sort of dread. Dr. Alice Renault hovered near the little table where Claudette had spread her notes and charms, every line of her body alert. No one had slept enough to improve their personalities. Sabine was still caught. Nothing they had done had made any difference. Whatever Morvant had done had not ended with her death. The contract still had holdfasts sunk somewhere deep. Sabine kept rebounding against the edge of release like a trapped thing, testing every seam of a locked room. Something physical still tethered her, mostly like something in her bones. The truth lay there in the courtyard with them, plain as daylight, and vastly less welcome. Alice looked at Lucien.
You know something.
Lucien kept his gaze on the water for a moment longer. Then he said,
I know where she was buried first. That's only the beginning of the problem.
Claudette inclined her head.
Keep going.
Sabine was interred at St. Peter's Cemetery.
Lucien said.
That's where the Devereux' dead went in those years. When St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 opened in 1789, St. Peter's was closed. Time did what time does. The city built over it. I arranged for the family remains to be moved.
Alice considered this thoughtfully.
You moved all of them?
I did. I was the last Devereux still in New Orleans, with both the authority and the inclination to see it done properly. I had a new crypt built in St. Louis, in marble, with the family names restored where possible. I made every gesture of devotion a dutiful son and brother can make for the dead while still being several decades past the point of emotional good sense.
That brought the faintest twitch to Claudette's mouth. In another hour, on another day, it might have become a smile.
So, Sabine's there,
Evelyn said. Lucien gave a weary nod.
Almost certainly.
Evelyn exhaled.
Then we go there.
No.
Lucien said, and the word fell with the quiet firmness of something final. He turned from the fountain then, and the old grief in his face took all the romance out of family tombs.
People speak of crypts as though each beloved remains neatly in place forever.
He said.
That would be pleasant. It would also be fiction. Coffins fail, wood rots, boxes collapse, generations settle. The dead become a history of gravity.
The courtyard seemed to draw closer around his voice.
My parents are there, their younger siblings as well. Several children died during the fever years. Infants, little brothers and sisters, buried in haste and sorrow. All of them were moved, carefully by the standards of the time, reverently, as much as one can manage while dealing with old remains in Louisiana heat. Precision, however, was not the gift of the 18th century offered anyone.
Alice had gone pale. Lucien looked at the fountain again.
Sabine is in that crypt. I would stake a great deal on that. Recognition is another matter.
So, how do we find her body?
Lucien met her gaze, and helplessness showed there in one clean, unguarded flash.
I do not know.
Silence settled over the courtyard. The fountain continued its small, silver conversation with itself. Somewhere, beyond the wall, a carriage horse passed in the street, hooves striking stone with the insulting cheerfulness of ordinary life going on. Evelyn straightened.
Then we need another way to identify her remains, or someone who can.
Someone,
Claudette said.
being the sort of person one prefers to avoid unless every other option has already burst into flames.
Lucien's face grew slowly more grim. Warmth entered the courtyard. It was subtle at first, with a slight change in the air, the faint brush of candle heat against skin. Alice turned toward the archway before anyone else did, more from instinct than understanding. Claudette went still beside the table. Something wary and ancient passed over her face. She might not know what exactly it was, but she felt the alarm of someone who had heard enough stories to know when one of them had stepped into the room. A figure stood beneath the far arch, one hand resting against the old brick, as though the house had invited him in personally, and the city beyond belonged to him by older right. He was the kind of handsome that made you want to know what the catch was before you finished the thought. He appeared precise and composed. His elegance had the quality of a thing honed rather than inherited, precise enough to make you aware of the effort, careful enough that you couldn't quite call it effort. Alice's breath caught. She had heard the name, of course. Everyone in this house had spoken it often enough, usually in tones that suggested the speaker would have preferred to set the syllables on fire. Still, hearing about Lucifer Morningstar and watching Lucien Devereux turn toward him with the exhausted fury of a man confronted by an unwelcome acquaintance were very different experiences. Lucien did not say, "Who are you?" No, Lucien looked straight at him and went cold with anger. That, more than anything, made Alice's stomach drop. Lucifer Morningstar was a figure out of legend, out of myth. A story from things that would bump in the night, and here was unavoidable evidence that Lucien knew him well enough that there was no ceremony in the recognition, only history. Claudette drew herself up a fraction taller. She had dealt with plenty of things in her life: spirits, witches, saints, liars, old grief, worse grief, and the occasional thing from below wearing a human face badly. The Prince of Hell himself, though, had apparently remained a matter of rumor, theology, and professional caution until this exact moment. She took one measured breath as if filing away the fact that Lucifer Morningstar was distressingly handsome and looked far too comfortable in this courtyard. His gaze moved from Lucien to Claudette's notes, to the fountain and back again, taking the measure of the silence with infuriating ease.
The body.
Lucifer said softly.
That's where the hook is set.
No one invited him further in. Alice remained very still. Some small, appalled part of her mind was still snagged on the absurdity of it. Lucifer Morningstar, the original rebel angel, the reputed king of hell, was here in this courtyard, and her uncle Lucien was on a first-name basis with him, as though the devil were an ex-lover, a good friend, or one more impossible person the family had been forced to seat at dinner. Lucifer looked almost tired, which was not a quality Alice had ever thought to assign him.
You can open tombs for days,
he said,
and try and persuade history to label itself for your convenience. Or I can go where you cannot and bring back what still clings to her.
Lucien's expression sharpened at once. Evelyn stepped away from the column. Alice said nothing. Her eyes widened just slightly, because the offer was useful in exactly the way poison was sometimes useful. Lucifer spread his hands.
I can retrieve Sabine,
he said.
Or enough of her to matter.
That was the trouble. He might be telling the truth, and his offer settled over the courtyard, bright and dangerous as a gold coin at the bottom of deep water. Mercy and Cassian in research mode. Cassian's office occupied the kind of downtown tower that expected expensive shoes, clean passwords, and people who knew how to keep secrets in 3-piece suits. Mercy followed him through a lobby of pale stone and polished glass, past a reception desk curved like a crescent moon, and security gates that opened at the touch of his badge with the soft obedience of very costly systems. The elevator rose in near silence. When the doors opened, the city spread itself beyond a wall of glass in silver and slate, rain streaking the skyline in fine vertical lines. He sat at the end of a corridor lined with smoked glass conference rooms and workstations so immaculate they looked as though the staff had been issued both laptops and moral expectations. Inside, everything was sleek, dark, and deliberate, furnished with a broad desk of black wood, 3 monitors, and one larger wall screen waiting in cool, blank patience. Shelves were arranged with books that belonged half to cybersecurity and half to a man who distrusted any worldview that lacked mythology. A low sofa looked soft enough to make Mercy suspicious. The room possessed no clutter and no magical hostility. The space was devoted to the expensive hum of machinery behaving exactly as designed. Mercy stood in the middle of it with the air of someone who had wandered into a chapel built by practical heretics with excellent funding. Cassian slid into his chair, woke the monitors with a few quick taps, and brought the room to life. Files opened, windows multiplied, records bloomed across the screens in brittle scans, municipal PDFs, non-profit filings, parish paperwork, and the kind of database entries that looked as though they had been typed by people who considered clarity a moral weakness. He retrieved property records first, then religious non-profit registrations. He pulled up school permits, tax filings, donor names, archived newspaper mentions so small and local they had barely survived their own printing. He located paperwork with gaps in it as well as state forms filed under names that sounded pious enough to avoid notice. Mercy watched the dates roll past.
These aren't old enough to feel safe,
she said. Cassian glanced back at her.
No. They are recent enough to make the bureaucracy dangerous.
The Sisters of the Purple Veil had not been around long by the standards of institutions with dramatic names and hidden purposes. 9 years ago, the Order of the Purple Veil had burned. A year after that, while grief was still new and the dead still had people speaking of them in the present tense, the sisters began to appear in scraps of paperwork and charitable records. The records were quiet, careful, as if they had no interest in being noticed by the wrong sort of eye. Cassian traced the filings forward. First came incorporation papers, then a cluster of permits tied to a rural property outside Alexandria. The dates held together. 2 years, maybe 3. The permits were registered long enough to establish a shelter and then outgrow it.
There,
he said, tapping the screen. The original site sat in a parish record as a small orphanage school outside Alexandria, registered through a religious nonprofit with a name plain enough to bore suspicion to death. There were references to renovations, educational accommodations, transport services, donor supplements, food contracts, and a small medical exemption that made Mercy's attention sharpen. She moved closer. As Cassian clicked through, the shape of the place emerged. The sisters had been sheltering children. Enough evidence emerged to hint that these were unusual children, magical children, probably children who would have been misunderstood, preyed upon, hidden badly, or handed over to institutions more interested in correction than care. The records carried the unmistakable tone of people trying to build safety on insufficient money and very little sleep. Mercy felt an anxiety within her smooth out.
They were protecting them,
she said quietly. Cassian nodded.
Looks that way.
There was no stench of predation in the paperwork. There was no pattern of trafficking or shell game finances suggesting exploitation. What showed through instead was effort and work, heating and air conditioning repair, staff shortages, and insurance headaches. There was a donor who paid for cots, and a local vendor who kept discounting groceries every quarter as though pretending charity was an accounting error. Mercy went still with it. She had expected to uncover another chamber of the same old cruelty, hidden or exploited children, religious hypocrisy, and a vanished paper trail. Louisiana had trained her not to trust that combination. What sat on Cassian's screen looked painfully sincere. Women who believed Mercy and Lenore were gone had built something in the ashes. They had started small. Their attempts were fragile, but determined. Cassian opened another file, then another. His expression grew troubled.
What?
Mercy asked. He enlarged a scanned permit renewal and pointed to a section where the attached correspondence should have been. It was gone. Another file had metadata that suggested it had been modified years after filing. A donor list ended with a page break that made no narrative sense. There were gaps in the sequence with missing attachments and broken links and records too recent to have frayed this badly by accident.
Some of this is ordinary decay,
he said.
Bad archiving, clerical indifference, digital entropy, just the typical patron saints of the local record keeping.
Mercy leaned over his shoulder.
But somebody has been here.
Cassian clicked between two versions of the same filing.
See this? Original address is blanketed in one copy, intact in the other. Both versions disappear after a certain year. The pattern is repeated here. These records stop being sloppy and start being selective.
Mercy stared at the screen. The Alexandria site remained clear enough. The next step in the sister story did not. Somewhere after those first 2 or 3 years, the trail bent sharply. Permits ended. Property ownership shifted. Supporting documentation thinned out. The institution had moved on, and somebody had done a careful job of pulling branches over the path behind it with practiced, careful skill.
Can you tell where they went?
Mercy asked.
Not yet.
Cassian sat back.
Only that they outgrew Alexandria. There are hints of expansion, donor increases, service transfers, maybe stronger local banking somewhere else. But the clean enter is gone.
Mercy lifted her gaze to the rain-streaked window, where the city lights shone in small, tilered halos. The sisters had spent 5 years in a new location, she thought. 5 years of children sleeping under another roof, with the sisters carrying on work somewhere out of sight. And someone else had been looking for them.
Then we stop reading about Alexandria,
she said. Cassian turned in his chair. Mercy's expression had settled into the kind he was beginning to recognize. It usually meant prayer had ended and action was about to begin.
We go see what's left of it in person.
Hecate's first truth. Renaud woke with mud under his hands and music in the distance. For a few long seconds, he stayed where he was, palms pressed into wet earth, head bowed, as if the world might sort itself out from sheer embarrassment if he gave it time. It declined. He lifted his head. The place around him had all the familiar ingredients of a nightmare and the organization of a memory someone had dropped and reassembled in the dark. Flooded midway paths curved through black water that reflected no sky he recognized. Tents stood open in the distance, their canvas walls missing, their ropes trailing loose as abandoned thoughts. Mirrors hung from the branches of dead trees, swaying gently, though no wind passed through. Fox tracks crossed the mud in looping patterns, threading over and around human footprints that led nowhere sensible. Candle flames hovered in the air at strange intervals, marking crossroads that had not been built so much as declared. From somewhere beyond the mirrors came carnival music, slowed to a devout crawl. Calliope notes, dragging their feet through the dark, like a hymn trying very hard to remember that it had once been written for joy. Renard sat up.
Well,
he muttered, wiping one hand on his coat.
This feels healthy.
His voice went nowhere. The place swallowed sound with grave attention. He rose carefully. His reflection watched him from half a dozen hanging mirrors, each one delayed by a fraction, as though none of them trusted him enough to keep pace. He hated that immediately. The tracks in the mud made a knot around him. Fox, human, then fox again. He followed them with his eyes and came to the clear, immediate conclusion that the universe was being smug. Hecate appeared with the calm certainty of something that had never considered doing otherwise. She arrived like an old law stepping into force. The candle flames steadied. The mirrors ceased their swaying. Even the muddy water seemed to pay attention. Renard straightened because dignity had never yet improved a bad situation, but remained difficult to surrender on principle.
If this is about dough,
He said.
I'm already on my way.
Hecate regarded him.
If this is about Raven, the carnival, my charming family inheritance, or some fresh metaphysical indignity involving foxes, I would appreciate a little notice next time.
Her gaze remained fixed on him, black and ancient and impossibly patient. Renard felt the first cold stirrings of understanding.
This isn't about them.
He said.
No.
She responded with just that single word. A door shut quietly somewhere in the dark. She stepped closer. The mud did not dare cling to her hem.
This is about Lucifer Morningstar.
Renard stared at her. There were names that, when spoken in certain places, changed the shape of the air. Lucifer's was one of them. The carnival music faltered in the distance, as if even the sound knew enough to take a breath. Renard laughed once, short and sharp.
Of course it is. Why should I get one catastrophe at a time like everyone else?
Hecate ignored the attempt at humor.
He made you immortal,
She said.
That was no gesture. It was a bargain, a binding bargain, agreed to and sealed.
The words sank into the mud around them like nails. Renard's face went carefully blank. Hecate continued.
Later, he killed you. He broke the terms of his own arrangement. A crossroads being broke his own law. That fracture did not vanish. It remained.
Something ugly and electric moved through Renard's chest. He understood the words, but not what that meant for him and why he was here.
He broke the bargain.
Renard said slowly.
Yes.
And that damaged him.
Yes.
The mirrors gave back his face from every angle available to human regret. Satisfaction laced her voice.
I have watched him a long time,
She said.
He stands in places he believes belong to him. He keeps what he thinks he can keep. He crosses where he please. Then he broke faith with the one he had marked under his protection.
Renard felt heat rise through him, swift and humiliating. It would have been easier, in its way, to discover he meant nothing. Men made peace with insignificance every day. They wrote poems about it. They drank over it. They built religions around it. This was something else. He mattered because he had become evidence. That one broken bargain created a crack in a structure vast enough to cast shade over the world. He was living proof that one of the great powers had failed to keep his own terms. He looked at Hecate with naked fury.
So that's what I am?
He said.
Paperwork?
The candle flames leaned as if listening for her answer.
You are the wound that answers when his name is pressed,
Hecate said. Renard flinched as though she had struck him. Hurt came next, dressed as anger because anger had better posture.
All this time.
He said, voice low.
And I matter because he slipped.
You matter because the law remembers,
said Hecate. Silence spread between them. The carnival music dragged itself through another exhausted phrase. Renard turned away from her and saw, in one of the hanging mirrors, a reflection of himself standing under Lucifer's hand, blessed or claimed or ruined, depending on the century and the mood. When he looked again, it was only his own face. Hecate spoke behind him.
When he broke faith with you,
she said,
he broke shelter around himself.
That settled through the drowned midway like a verdict. Renard stood very still while the truth found all its places to hurt. Lucifer asks to help. Lucien answered him first.
No,
he said without raising his voice. The word crossed the courtyard with the clean finality of a lock turning. Lucifer held his gaze.
You are bleeding time.
We know, Evelyn said. Lucifer turned slightly toward her, accepting her voice as the steadier authority in the room.
Then you understand the arithmetic. The family tomb was full of old remains, centuries of collapse, heat, rot, flood, human error, and the ordinary indifference time shows to the dead. You can spend days in that crypt and come back with grief under your fingernails and no Sabine.
Alice, still standing near the table with her heart behaving badly, heard herself say,
What if he's right?
Every head turned toward her. Wonderful, she thought. I've spoken in front of the devil. Her face warmed, but the question had already left her mouth, and there was no calling it back.
What if he really is the fastest way?
Silence followed. It was a thinking silence, the heavy silence that gathers when everyone present hated a possibility and still had to examine it. Lucifer looked at her, and some uneasy part of Alice registered that his attention felt less like being noticed and more like being weighed.
He is,
Lucifer said quietly. Lucien's expression hardened.
That settles nothing.
It settles the practical matter.
Lucifer replied.
I can go below the problem. I can find what still clings to her. I can bring Sabine back within the reach of your hands.
Evelyn stepped forward then, and the air shifted with her. There is always a cost, she said. Lucifer's gaze rested on hers. A strange weariness passed across his face, quick as a bird shadow over water.
Yes.
And you know, Evelyn said, why none of us is eager to let you name it. Lucifer went still. Sadness showed itself for the briefest moment, then withdrew behind the composed beauty he wore so easily. Lucien's hand tightened on the fountain rim.
You do not get to fix this,
he said. Lucifer looked at him for a long beat. Whatever answer he might have given to anyone else, he did not give to Lucien.
No,
he said at last.
Perhaps I don't.
The courtyard held itself still around them. Claudette said nothing. She stood very straight, face set, all her unease hidden inside a silence that had become its own kind of shield. She had dealt with many things in her life, but Lucifer Morningstar within eyesight sat in a category of its own. Then suddenly, Lucifer's head turned slightly, as though some distant sound had reached him from far below the level of ordinary hearing. His expression sharpened. He looked past the archway, past the city, into whatever system of roads and thresholds lay under the skin of the world.
What is it?
Evelyn asked. Lucifer did not answer at once. The warmth around him thinned. His attention had gone elsewhere.
A road moved,
He said softly. Lucien straightened. Lucifer listened to that far disturbance with the cold concentration of a ruler hearing trouble in a province he had once believed secure. Then he looked back at them, all polish restored, all feeling locked away again.
You are short on time in more directions than you think,
He said, and with that he stepped back beneath the arch, taking his offer with him like a lit candle no one had dared to pick up. Thank you for listening to Tongue of the Serpent. Tonight threads began to tighten. Sabine's tether led back toward the Devereux dead. Mercy and Cassian uncovered the first fragile shape of what the sisters built after the fire. Lucifer offered help in the way Lucifer offers anything, useful, dangerous, and impossible to trust. And Renard learned that one broken bargain may have left a mark far deeper than he understood. But not every trail can be followed from a screen, and not every road keeps to the living world. Next time, Mercy and Cassian leave New Orleans behind and drive toward Alexandria, where an old house waits with dust on its windowsills, children's rooms gone quiet, and memories that have not finished speaking. Until then, lock your doors kindly, mind your bargains carefully, and be wary of any road that shows you the same tree twice.